Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. If you're just joining us, we will get started with the presentations in just a moment, but I just wanted to talk about a little bit about Zoom and how this is going to work for those of you who maybe haven't had as much experience with it. So my name is Cindy Hansen. I'm the Education and Events Coordinator for Orca Network, and the rest of the team will introduce themselves as we go. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about how this will work. We will have a few presentations, and then at the end we'll do Q&A. So we're going to ask everybody to save questions for the end, but we're going to do it through the Q&A box. So if you haven't really used Zoom a lot before, if you go to the bottom, you'll see a Q&A box. And if you click on that, you'll be able to write your question in there. So if questions come up as we go along, feel free to write those in that box. And then once Lynn is done speaking, we'll go through and read those questions to her and allow her to answer them. And we'll see how much time we have for those. So if you don't think you'll remember your question till the end, feel free to go ahead and write it in that Q&A box. There's also a chat feature, so feel free to use that. That's also on the bottom. If you click on that, you can make comments, talk to each other, talk to the panelists. So feel free to use that as well. So at this point, I will turn it over to Susan Berta.
Well, welcome everybody. We're really happy to have you here. Thanks to Cindy and to Amanda, our education assistant, and Cindy, our coordinator, for being our Zoomineers who help us through all these days of virtual education. They have been doing a lot of amazing work, and we're very thankful for this platform that enables us to continue doing our education during these difficult times. So I welcome you to the first in our series of webinars that we're going to be doing through our Share the Water project. Before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples whose lands we all occupy and whose waters we ply on when we're out in the Salish Sea, and just honor all of their ancestral knowledge that they have of this area, much of which gives us a lot of what we know and how we can relate to the orcas and the salmon, and how they are connected to each other into the habitats, and how we're all connected. And just a reminder to, you know, as we walk these lands and we're out on the waters, especially remember all who came before us, including the Coast Salish people, but even the salmon and the orcas who came before them. And when we're out in the Salish Sea, we're visiting them in their homes. And it's, you know, they've been here a lot longer than us, and our goal is to reduce our impacts as much as possible, so they will be here for generations to come. So tonight we're really excited to have Lynne Barre from NOAA Protected Resources. She has been a big part of working on the orca recovery efforts, and the Be Whale-Wise program is something that's been in the works for decades now, and Orca Network is a partner in it, along with many other organizations and the Pacific Whale Watch Association. And I remember a lot of the early days, the Whale Watch Association and NOAA Fisheries worked together to form some of the initial guidelines before there were a lot of the regulations that we have in place today. So there are new regulations thanks to the Orca Task Force, and it can get pretty complicated. So I'm really glad we have Lynne here to walk us through that. And one of the reasons we're doing this is our Orca Network's whale sighting network is focused mainly on shore-based whale watching, and we have a list of viewpoints where you can watch whales from land, but we also acknowledge we're in really urban waterways here, especially down in Puget Sound. So as this area grows, we have more and more people out in boats, out on the water, or kayaks or paddle boards. And with COVID, what we've seen, a lot of people are working at home or living in their summer homes in the islands or Kitsap Peninsula, and having more time to spend out in and on the water. So we're seeing a huge increase in boat sales, which also means a lot of new boaters out there who may not know about the regulations or may not know what whales are in our area at different times of the year. So our mission is to reach out and educate people about the amazing whales and other marine mammal species in the Salish Sea, and inspire boaters to care about who we're sharing our waters with, and teach them how to be respectful and safe, not only for the whales, but for the boaters too. Because in most cases, the whales are much bigger than the boats we are in. And so we want to make sure everybody's safe out there. Lynne will talk about the Be Whale Wise program, which also, for those of you out there who are shore-based watchers, the bewhalewise.org website is a great place to report violations if you see boaters out there, or if you're a boater following the rules, you see someone else. So Lynne will share a lot of that great information with us. But first, we're going to have Elisa Lemire Brooks, our Whale Sighting Network coordinator, talk a little bit about our sighting network and what species you might see when you're out there boating in Puget Sound and the Salish Sea. So Elisa, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. So this is just going to be really brief because we wanted to focus on boater education today and all watercraft. But we wanted to just share with you all, some may not be familiar, trying to figure out how to, there we go, who all we share these waters with. And we'll focus on the whales, and I'm going to do a dolphin porpoise slide as well. So any time of the year, we will see big transient orcas, the mammal eating type, and we are seeing them quite a bit. They've been in almost every day for the last few months. Inland Puget Sound, but definitely around the Salish Sea they are, but inland Puget Sound has been the busiest year so far. So they are regulars now and can come in year round, and there's some peak times they're here. The southern residents, Lynne will talk more about, but you know, they come into inland Puget Sound waters in the fall and winter months following the salmon runs that are here. And then also more and more we're seeing humpbacks that have recovered from being extirpated from this area, the Salish Sea, and they're abundant, and they're lovely big giants that we're finding in Puget Sound more and more. This year we haven't seen as many this summer yet. We'll see what September brings. The gray whales, we have our regular about a dozen or so North Puget Sound gray whales that come in anywhere mid-February and usually stay until mid-May. But with the NOAA declared an unusual mortality event last year, so we've the last few years actually had some that have actually stayed over, and we still have several new 2020 gray whales that have found the food up in the Whidbey area and Possession Sound, Everett, Hat Island, and we have 3 that are still here. So they're out there, and we want to be mindful to watch for them because they can surface anywhere. They're very random at times where they can surface. So, and some of these gray whales hang out right outside the Everett Marina quite consistently. So there's a lot of boat traffic coming and going there. So we really like to get some outreach out to the boaters in that area, especially with these baleen whales. Minkies, we get minkies inland Puget Sound and around definitely out upper Admiralty Inlet area and up in the San Juans I am kind of focusing on the lower Salish Sea here and more emphasis on Puget Sound proper, as you can tell. But so you'll see them. We also get dolphins and porpoise and occasional fin whale. About once a year, fin whale is seen out in Juan de Fuca Strait, but we also get them in here sometimes. So it's not unheard of to have fin whale come in here. And so this next slide, just show you that, you know, we have the humpback up there on top and the gray whale, and these two most often get mis-ID'd as one or the other because maybe people don't know we have both in here. So the easiest identifier is the humpback's little small dorsal there. And then also you can see the minke and the fin whale are very similar in their shape, but they are very dissimilar in size. Fin whale could be up to 3 times as large as a minke. But in general, those two whales you wouldn't see their exhalations, whereas with the gray whales and the humpbacks, you would. And then quickly, so the Pacific white-sided dolphin is native to the Salish Sea and the inland waters, but inland Puget Sound, we haven't had any reports of them for several years now. So, and also in the Salish Sea, there are just not as many around. But those are the one dolphin that are native to here. And then down below, one of the harbor porpoise there is the little cetacean you're most likely to see out here. And then we do have an occasional Dall's porpoise, but they're pretty rare now as well. And then inland Puget Sound in the last couple of years, there's some dolphins that have come in that are native to, their range wouldn't be more than necessarily Northern California, but in 2016, a large group of common dolphins came in, and we've had some that remained, and it looks like we're probably down to just one of that original group, Cinco, who's been seen quite a bit, and we've been getting a lot of reports, which has been great. But so anytime you see one spinning around, jumping around, or bow riding, it's Cinco. But there's also another few dolphins that we haven't been able to confirm the IDs on, but it looks like there's another group. So, and then bottlenose dolphins come in once in a while as well, and we had 2 known bottlenose dolphins in up until we haven't had a report for at least a year, and I don't think Cascadia Research has had one either. So just wanted to give you a quick overview that these are some of the marine mammals you're most likely to see out there when you're boating. Thanks. And now I'll turn it over to Lynne.
Great. Thank you, Elisa. And Lynne, I will get the PowerPoint up. Whoops, first I will make sure I have a share screen.
Great, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. And then do you want to just say next, because I'm probably going to have to get rid of the picture of you. I was just going to have you nod or something, but I may make you all go away here. I think I need to get, there we go.
All right, well, I'm Lynne Barre with NOAA Fisheries, and I'm going to focus tonight on southern resident killer whales, which were the inspiration for our Be Whale Wise campaign. And just to get everyone on the same page, I'll give you a little bit of background on those southern resident orcas. These are whales in our waters that live in stable family groups. You may have heard about J, K, and L pods. We can individually identify each member of the population in those 3 pods, and there's a picture here from a photo identification catalog from the Center for Whale Research. So that unique marking of saddle patch and dorsal fin for each whale is really an amazing way for us to get to know these individuals. These whales are the salmon eaters, the fish eaters, and our research indicates that they primarily focus on Chinook salmon. And they're acoustic animals. They use sound to find their food. There's a great illustration here of echolocation, where the whales send out signals into their environment. It bounces off something like a Chinook salmon and gives them information. They're also very social, and they make calls, and they have distinct and unique dialects for this southern resident killer whale population, and also some unique behaviors. Next. So just a little background on why the southern resident killer whales are endangered. The Center for Whale Research has been doing an annual census for decades. And so they've tracked the population because they can identify the individuals. We can count the whales and know exactly how many there are. And so you can see there was a nice increase in this population that followed captures for aquariums and display up until about the mid-1990s. And then we saw an almost 20% population decline. And this is what prompted looking into what was the status of this population of whales and identifying the major threats of prey availability. Some of those Chinook salmon runs that the whales are feeding on are also listed under the Endangered Species Act as threatened or endangered. These whales live a long time, and throughout their lives, they can accumulate harmful contaminants. And as they're acoustic animals, they can also be impacted by vessels and noise. So those were the major threats identified when NOAA did list this population as endangered back in 2005. And we completed a recovery plan identifying actions to address all of the threats listed here and additional threats as well, like oil spills. And so the recovery plan is really broad. It covers all the threats. It relies on research and links to projects to help us learn more about the whales so that we can identify how to recover them. And some of those actions are specifically tied to the vessel guidelines and regulations in our Be Whale Wise campaign. And unfortunately, as of now, according to the Center of Whale Research and their ongoing census, there's only 72 whales in this population. So it's very small and very vulnerable. Next. And that precious and precarious status of the whales helped NOAA kind of identify this as what we call a species in the spotlight, an endangered species that's declining, but one that we have a good sense of some of the things that we need to do. And we put together a more focused and streamlined short-term action plan about 5 years ago. And it includes actions to protect the whales from the harmful vessel impacts, to target recovery of their critical prey, investigate those contaminants and other things that can be affecting their health, protecting important habitats, and also raising awareness and inspiring stewardship. Next. And even more recently, all of this is happening with an urgency and awareness of the public increasing. So there's a lot going on here on this slide. We've had a lot of media attention. Linda Mapes at the Seattle Times did an ongoing series of these big inserts in the paper reporting. Governor Inslee in Washington State put together an orca task force over the last couple of years. And then another media attention grabber was poor Tahlequah, who carried her dead calf for 17 days a couple of years ago. But on the brighter side of that story, one of the more recent news articles was about the fact that she's pregnant again. We know that from one of our research partners who's taking aerial photos with a drone, and we can look at the body shape of the whales. Next. So coming out of that killer whale task force, there were a number of recommendations. And similar to our recovery program that's been in place for many years, the recommendations covered all of the threats: prey, vessels, contaminants, and also in a second year report, we tackled some tough stuff like climate change and human population growth. Next slide. So many of those actions are being implemented now, and some of them required some legislation in Washington State. And 4 bills passed related to orca recovery, and they had to do with things like salmon habitat, toxic pollution, oil spill prevention, and one that I'll focus on a little bit today was Washington State passed this regulation that adjusted the viewing distances for the whales and also kicked off a process to identify a licensing program for commercial whale watching. Next. So I'm going to dive into one of the actions in our Species in the Spotlight action plan to protect the whales from vessel impacts. And we do that in a number of ways, looking at enforcement of the rules we have in place, education, which is exactly what we're here tonight working on, and evaluating how effective the rules in place are. So I want to give you a little bit of background on some of the science that helps support the work we're doing to minimize vessel impacts. Next. So I'm just going to pick a couple of studies to share with you. One showed that the whales tend to travel more often and forage less often when the vessels were nearby. And of course that connects to the other threat of perhaps not having enough of the Chinook salmon to make the energy needs that they require to live their lives and reproduce. So that combination of factors can also play in with contaminants. And if they're not getting enough to eat, or vessels are interrupting their foraging, they might use their blubber stores and circulate more of the contaminants in their system. Next. So that's focused on how vessels can affect behavior, but vessels also can be noisy. So there's two figures here. On the bottom is just a pretty simple graph that shows as the number of vessels near the whales increases, the background noise levels from those vessels also increases. And then if you take that a step further in the graph on the top, this is showing that as that background noise level increases, the whales have to increase their calls, the source levels. They have to speak up so that they can hear each other over the sound of the boats. Next. And the next one I want to talk about is a digital acoustic tag study, and we've got an animation that'll go here for you. So you'll see a yellow dot, that's K33 with a suction cup tag. That's recording the dive pattern, any foraging that's happening, as well as what sounds the whale is hearing. And then we're also recording information about any boats that are nearby the whale. So these are track lines connecting those red dots as the boats move through the water, following the whale and the whale's movement. And this has been a really valuable study indicating that one of the biggest factors in how much sound the whales are receiving is how fast those vessels are going. So results from this study, as well as the others, have all played in to helping us develop the Be Whale-Wise guidelines and the regulations. And I also just want to mention one other data source, which is our partners at Soundwatch through the Whale Museum, who are on the water, also collecting data similar to this, where they're recording how many boats are near the whales and what's that boater behavior. Are they following rules and guidelines, or are they not? And so combining all this data together, we looked at our recovery plan and knew we had to think about what protections were necessary. Next. And so in 2011, following a state effort to kind of convert some of our previous guidelines to regulations, NOAA put in place US federal regulations. And there were two main pieces to that. One was an approach restriction. So there's a 200-yard circle around the killer whales. And that's for all killer whales in inland waters of Washington. And also a prohibition on parking in the path of the whales. So we want to make sure the whale's path is clear out to 400 yards. And so those rules went into place in 2011 and complemented the ongoing Be Whale-Wise program that previously had been focused on guidelines. All right, next. So where are we today? There's a lot of history of how we've gotten to where we are, but in 2019 and 2020, coming out of the Orca Task Force and also some new efforts in Canada, this is what our guidance looks like today. And don't worry, it looks complicated, but I'm going to walk you through it. But some of the main points are that we've increased some of those distances to give the whales more space. And we've set some speed limits in different places, recognizing the new science that tells us speed is a big impact on how loud the sounds are that the whales are hearing and how much they might interfere with the whale's communication or echolocation. We also have still more information coming in from Soundwatch and their partner organization in Canada, Straightwatch. Data on monitoring that boater compliance with the rules as they're changing throughout the years, and also just being out on the water educating boaters. So that's been an ongoing effort. And enforcement as well. Both NOAA and state Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife are the main enforcement efforts out on the water. And there's been increased support for the state enforcement to do additional patrols, again, coming out of that ORCA task force. And the research is still ongoing. That DTAG project is ongoing, and we're learning new things about how sound can affect the success of a foraging dive, or what's happening at night when maybe there's fewer vessels and sound around. Next. So I'm going to break it down for you. We'll start with the Washington state regulations. So first, that orange band around the whales, that's the 300-yard approach distance on the sides of the whales. And then we've got some red sections that mark a 400-yard distance in front and behind. So these are the areas to stay out of, to stay further away, to give the whales space. The state regulations also have a speed limit of less than 7 knots when you're within a half mile of the whales. And that's that yellow border showing out to a half nautical mile. So this state regulation, this applies to just southern residents, but it applies in all Washington waters. So while each of these rules I'm going to walk through are a little different based on the different jurisdiction, there's also a lot of synergy and some easy things to help us all remember what to do on the water. Okay, so next let's go to Canada. So Canadian regulations are to stay 400 meters away from all orcas between Campbell River and just north of Ucluelet. And I will show you a map of that in case you aren't familiar with the area. And then in other areas in the Pacific waters in Canada, there's a 200-meter approach rule for orcas. And in Canada, the speed limit is similar, but it's just a guideline. It's not part of their regulations at this time. And the Canadian regulation apply to all orcas, so residents and transients. They do have an exception for commercial whale watch operators that have an agreement in place where they're able to get a little closer to the transient killer whales. Next. Here's the map I was promising to show you about where those 400-meter Canadian regulations apply, this sort of brownish color. And Canada also has a lot of other things going on here. They've got some red areas that are interim sanctuary zones where boats are required to stay out of. They also have some fishing zones in yellow and some voluntary measures in pink that I'll tell you a little bit more about in a couple slides. Next. Okay, so we've talked about Washington, we've talked about Washington State, but what about those US federal regulations I mentioned earlier? Well, they're still in place too. And while we're deferring and supporting those increased distances, we also still have rules in place for the 200-yard approach and the 400-yard path, keeping that clear. So that 400-yard path matches up just perfectly with the other regulations. And I just want to highlight that the federal 200-yard approach distance applies to both southern residents and transients. And while this may seem complicated, and we are all working toward simplifying and coming together and aligning our rules where we can, it is challenging when we've got 2 different countries and with different laws in place and a state jurisdiction as well. So a good rule of thumb is when in doubt, if you don't know whether those killer whale fins you see in the distance are transients or residents, just stay that 400 yards or 400 meters distance away from the orcas and be sure to slow down. So those are some really good, just general rules to follow, especially if you have any doubt about what you're seeing on the water. And one other thing to mention is that 400 yards or meters, they're not exactly the same, but kind of close enough that we use those interchangeably. And that seems like a really long distance. If you think about it in something like a football field, of 4 football fields, that seems so far away. How could you even see a killer whale? But on the water, distance can be really deceiving. And because that water surface, you can see quite a distance. And some things you can try out are, you know, marking your distance from shore and looking at when are you half mile away and what can you see on that shoreline. And that might give you a good idea of the distances to stay for killer whales as well. All right, next. Okay, now let's get into some fine print. So on top is the Be Whale Wise brochure. And right on there, it talks about guidelines and laws for boaters, paddlers, viewers. So right there with paddlers and with the figure, the graphic, you can see there's some kayaks in there too. That lets you know that these rules apply to both motorized boats and non-motorized boats. So a power boat or a sailboat or even a kayak, that's our audience for Be Whale Wise. And while we know kayaks are somewhat different, or paddling gives you different capabilities of keeping your distance perhaps, we do have some specific guidelines to help kayakers knowing that they have different capabilities. And that's a kayak education program called KELP. And if you want to learn more about that, it's on the Be Whale Wise webpage. So let's go to the second red circle in the fine print there below that Be Whale Wise graphic. So what does that say? Well, this is for all those other marine mammals that we heard about in the Salish Sea. So there's currently a 100-yard or meter approach distance for all the other marine mammals that you might see out there on the water or even on the shore. And in the US, that 100-yard distance is a guideline. But in Canada, there's actually a regulation to protect whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And then in Canada, that regulation also includes a 200-meter distance from whales, dolphins, or porpoises if they're resting or with their calf. And if you're not sure if they're resting, if you see an animal sort of steady at the surface or spending some time catching its breath and hanging out, that might be resting. And pretty easy to know if it's a calf. It's a smaller animal and probably right next to its mom. So we do have a focus on southern residents, but a broad message for our Be Whale Wise campaign that includes all marine mammals. I think we've even got some language in there about being respectful when watching birds as well. And NOAA has another program called Share the Shore. And that's really focused on shore-based people who see seals and sea lions or pinnipeds hauled out on the beach. So again, that 100-yard distance and some other recommendations of how to know if you're disturbing those seals and sea lions on the beach and how to share the shore with them. And I'll just say there is more fine print if you want to get into even more detail, looking at all of these specific regulations, including some exceptions. One that's really important is safety. So we want to make sure everyone's being safe out on the water and they're not putting themselves in jeopardy. And some of those safe boat operations also go to the ships in the shipping lane. Those are established and operated in a way to make sure that they're operated safely and we don't have the risk of collisions or groundings that could result in unsafe conditions or even an oil spill. And exceptions for researchers who are doing permitted work and also government vessels that are doing their usual duties, and also for fishermen who are actively tending or setting or retrieving their gear. All right, next. So we don't just have rules and regulations, we also have some voluntary things that we promote with our partners, including working with the whale watch industry and with San Juan County, another important partner. So each year, the whale watch industry, they have a Pacific Whale Watch Association that includes members from the US and Canada. And they really focus on how can they safely operate and have extra rules for the industry about coming and going on scene where the whales are or limiting their viewing time if there's a certain number of boats from the association present. So they have additional guidelines as well. And then there's also area-based guidelines. We have a voluntary no-boat zone along the west side of San Juan Island. And this is something that's been in place for decades, but just in the last couple years, it's been extended. So now it goes all the way from Mitchell Bay down to Cattle Point. And you'll see an orange area, that's a 1/4 mile offshore where we want boats to stay out of. And then, yeah, that yellow spot around Lime Kiln is a 1/2 mile around that great land-based viewing area at Lime Kiln Whale Watch Park. And we've done some additional outreach to different audiences in the last couple of years, working with our partners at Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, reaching out to the fishing community, working with all kinds of boaters on the water. So another great initiative is the whale warning flag. So you'll see this flag out on the water, some yellow and red with a black whale's tail right in the middle. That's a program San Juan County has spearheaded, and they are educating boaters that they can get a flag to fly on their boat. And when that flag is flying, it signals to other boaters that there's whales in the area. So, hey, what do? You slow down so you can make sure you're following the speed guidelines and regulations depending on where you are. And also that's a great time to start looking around for the whales so you can make sure to keep your distance. Another voluntary effort is that's associated with all these things is to turn off your fish finder or echo sounder if it's safe to do so. So that's just another source of sound in the water associated with a boat that can interfere with the whales. And from those digital acoustic tags that are suction cupped onto the whales, we can actually record the sounds of those echo sounders that the whales are hearing. So Be Whale Wise and the Pacific Whale Watch Association guidelines and the whale warning flag are also ways to let people know if it's safe to do so, to turn off your echo sounder. Okay, next. Next, I want to talk about some of the voluntary initiatives in Canadian waters. So I've been lucky enough to work with a group called ECHO, which is Enhancing Cetacean Habitat and Observations. And this is an industry-led initiative from the Port of Vancouver. And for the last few years, working with this group that has a number of stakeholders at the table, industry, government, NGOs, we've had some voluntary measures like a slowdown in Harrow Strait, and then expanding that area to Boundary Pass as well. And this provides an option for those vehicle carriers, cruise ships, container vessels, tankers, ferries, all kinds of boats in the shipping lanes to slow down. And that can reduce the sound in the environment. And as you'll see, these areas go right along the US and Canadian border and happen to go right along that west side of San Juan Island that we know is an important foraging area. And also that's part of the voluntary no boat zone on the US side. And I will say, it's been really interesting to work on the ECHO program, and it's been very successful. They're actually measuring the reduction in sound when those vessels do slow down. And even though it's voluntary, they have really high participation by the vessels. And so learning from that experience, one of the recommendations in the Orca Task Force was to develop a similar program in the US. And so we've been working on that. It's a program that's in development as we speak. Next. There's a couple other Canadian measures, including a slowdown for vessels that are outbound by Swiftsure Bank, which is one of their interim sanctuary zones in Canadian waters. And of course, those vessels are coming from not just the Port of Vancouver, but also from Seattle and Tacoma. So it's an opportunity for all our ports to help educate the boats that are leaving their ports and heading out to slow down. There's also a lateral displacement for some tugboats along this kind of southwest edge of Vancouver Island, that green and yellow area. And that's just another way to move some vessels that are making sound further away from important foraging areas for the whales. Next. All right, so I threw a lot at you. I've got a couple more slides, but I just want to say that even if we can't get to your questions tonight, the bewhalewise.org website is a great place to get more information or links to the very detailed descriptions of each of the regulations of all the Be Whale Wise guidelines. We've got the kelp kayak guidelines there, the Share the Shore for protecting pinnipeds. And as Susan mentioned, you can also report violations. So if you do see something that you think is boater behavior around the whales that's not complying with these rules and guidelines, there's a way to report that goes directly to NOAA enforcement. And you can even post a picture if that's helpful in explaining what you saw. So lots of information about the guidelines, the regulations, reporting violations. There's contact information and links to many of our partners like Orca Network, places to report sightings, land-based viewing through Orca Network, as well as the Whale Trail. So I encourage you to check out bewhalewise.org when you get a chance. Next. So part of this is all related to one of our other actions in the action plan and also our recovery plan, which is not just having these rules in place, and it's educating the boaters and raising awareness about the needs of the Southern residents and inspiring people to be stewards of their habitat. And we do a lot of education and outreach. Next. So not just about Be Whale Wise, although that's a big part of a lot of the outreach we do with our partners, but also about everything that could be impacting the whales and things that you can do. So that includes sighting networks like Orca Network, the Whale Museum and the Sound Watch program doing on the water boater education. It's really critical. We work with the Seattle Aquarium and with classroom programs like Killer Whale Tales, and we use the amazing things we know about the whales. We've got trading cards for each individual whale in the population with facts about the whales as well as conservation messages. We're sharing this information with naturalists, with the Whale Watch Association, and with a number of nonprofit groups. And at the bottom of this slide, I've pulled the bottom of the Be Whale Wise brochure and the poster that has all the logos of many, of our many partners. So starting with some of the government groups, but including a number of different nonprofits. And so there's lots of people helping spread the word, and we really appreciate you being on tonight to help be a part of that. And the next one last slide, just to let you know that this is a big part of what we're doing to inspire people to take action. And so one of the things people can do is visit bewhalewise.org and really learn about the regulations so you can be a safer boater for yourself and to protect the whales. And also you can learn to watch whales from shore, and also reporting sightings to support that land-based whale watching as well. Some other things you can do are to volunteer for a habitat restoration project in your local watershed. Restoring salmon habitat and salmon streams helps support the prey that the whales need. Same goes for things like reducing water use to protect salmon who can be impacted by hydropower operations, and minimizing runoff that contains a lot of chemical contaminants. And as we mentioned, you can report harassment or disturbance through the bewhalewise.org webpage. And you can also be a voice for the whales. Track your local policies and contact your representatives and let them know what you think is important to help support the whales. And then one last thing is unfortunately, we do have limited opportunities to really understand why the Southern residents aren't surviving, why they're not reproducing. And one of the tools we have is to do a really full, thorough workup if we see a stranded animal that's washed up on shore. So that's a really important thing for us to learn about and get reporting. So I've put the stranding hotline here, and Orca Network is one of our partners in the stranding network for all stranded or injured or dead marine mammals we see on the beach. And I think I will leave it there, and we do have some time for questions. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate you being here and know how busy you are working on so many different things for our orcas that It was an honor to have you, and I'll be quiet so we can answer questions.
All right, thank you, Lynn, so much for being here. We have 2 questions so far, and again, those of you who are attending, feel free to write any questions you have in the Q&A, and we will get to as many as we can. So the first one says, Lynn, thank you. While there is work being done on licensing regulations for whale watching operators, what is being done around boater education licensing for private boaters, whom I observe to break the rules and pose a much bigger threat?
Yes, and recreational boaters are a bigger threat. We know that from the data Soundwatch collects, that shows the boats that are most often not following the rules are recreational boaters. These are boaters that either don't know about the rules and the guidelines or don't care to follow them. So we're doing a number of things. Not only do we have Soundwatch that's out on the water, educating boaters right as they're maybe heading to an area where there are whales, providing those guidelines and regulations, but we're also doing work off the water. I had a great opportunity to spend time at the Seattle Boat Show earlier this year and just talk to recreational boaters. We sold a lot of whale warning flags and let people know how to use those to promote stewardship. And each of those people was learning about the regulations in purchasing that flag and wanting to fly it on their boat. We are working with the state agencies that do boat licensing. This is another recommendation out of the task force, and I have to admit I don't know the exact status of where that stands, but there was definitely discussion about incorporating Be Whale Wise information into the boater safety required training that happens, and perhaps even distributing Be Whale Wise materials with boater registrations. So that's definitely a work in progress. And all ideas are welcome. And hey, I'm going to even share with you my favorite idea that we haven't made traction on yet, which is for all the commuters out there, why not put some whale messages on the Orca card? So if anyone has any contact, feel free to let me know, and we'll see if we can make something like that happen to just further raise awareness. Oh, and there was another thing that was new this year is Shell stations, particularly near boat marinas and ramps. Shell is a partner in a killer whale grant program, and they were doing some extra education and outreach around Be Whale Wise at their Shell stations. So yeah, lots of avenues, and as you can see, there's so many partners that are helping engage in Be Whale Wise, and so we welcome lots of help from all kinds of people. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Lynn. So the next question is, I believe education is more important than enforcement, but in reporting violations, I've been told that video is much more helpful to enforcement officers than a still image. Can you comment on this?
Sure, there's definitely things that the enforcement agents would find useful. If you have a video, the online system doesn't, I don't think you can post a video, but you could certainly provide your contact information and have enforcement follow up with you. It is often hard to judge a distance in a photograph, and so video can help with that. And also just any identifying information about the vessel itself can be helpful. So maybe a photograph could help with that side of things. But there's some definite prompts of what information is helpful in reporting to enforcement. And I agree, enforcement is sort of our backstop, and it's really important, but education is the key. Although I will mention one result from the Soundwatch data is they certainly see fewer violations when enforcement and monitoring vessels are on site and present. And that's not a big surprise. I think many people slow down if they see a police car at the side of the highway. So having those enforcement patrols on the water can be an education moment on its own.
Thank you. So this is a little bit out of the purview of recreational boating, but it's a good question. Is there any evidence of interbreeding between the resident and transient populations? And if not, why?
No, they don't seem to interbreed. The why, that's a harder one to answer. These whales have evolved differently. They have different physiology. The transients have a kind of a stronger jaw because of the marine mammal prey that they're capturing. They have a different social structure. They make different sounds. So I think there's probably enough differences and cues that they can certainly tell each other apart, and they seem to actually avoid each other. And yeah, they don't seem to interbreed. And there's probably ways for them to help avoid that, but you know, why is an interesting question, and you know, maybe has to do with that cultural significance for each of those different killer whale groups.
All right, the next one says, great, thanks, Lynn. I know this is such a difficult question, but can you comment on the incidental take authorization, U.S. Navy Northwest Training and Testing, proposed rule, and the concerns for impacts to southern resident killer whales?
Sure. So the Navy has come to NIMS to get authorization under the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act for their training and testing activities in the Northwest. I will say that our headquarters office is the lead for that action, but here in the Seattle office, we've been providing a lot of information on the southern resident killer whales, and we've been working closely with our colleagues at headquarters and with the Navy to ensure that there's sufficient mitigation. I know there was a lot of comments during the public comment period, and we're currently, you know, working through those, talking to the Navy, talking to our headquarters office, so it's an ongoing process. But I will say this isn't the first time NOAA has authorized these types of activities, and there are a lot of mitigations in place and strong reporting requirements around their implementation of those mitigation measures.
Great. Next question. How do you feel about the whale watching boats? Don't we need them to help the whales? I mean, to help educate the public and the private boaters both.
So we've, nationwide, NOAA has worked with commercial whale watch operations in programs like Be Whale-Wise, as well as other programs in different parts of the country, like Whale Sense. There's also a Dolphin Smart program. These are initiatives to make sure that the commercial whale watch operator are aware of guidelines and aware of best management practices to minimize their impact on endangered species or any marine mammals. So we've, you know, long had a partnership with whale watching industry so that it can be conducted safely and responsibly with, you know, as little impact or no impact to the animals as possible. And I really appreciate here in the Pacific Northwest that we have the Pacific Whale Watch Association. So we have a very easy way to communicate with them, to hear their concerns, to help provide the information for their naturalists so that they can educate their passengers and inspire the stewardship that we know is so important for recovery of the whales. So I think they do have a role. And there's been a lot of discussion specifically around viewing southern resident killer whales because their population is so perilous. Only 72 whales, a declining population. And so most recently, with the news of some pregnant females out there in the population, you know, we reach out to all boaters, including the commercial whale watch operators, to really, you know, follow the rules, guidelines, or even give the whales more space. There's other marine mammals, as we heard earlier, and saw some of those great pictures of other whales and dolphins and porpoises that are in our waters.
All right, next question. Do you have any plans of partnering with the Coast Guard through their environmental protection program to enforce these laws? Do you have plans on using aerial vehicles to report multiple vessels at once breaking the law, as well as have harsh penalties depending how seriously they break the law?
So the Coast Guard is one of our partners in Be Whale-Wise. Their logo is right there on the front. And we do work, I'd say primarily on the education side with Coast Guard Auxiliary, providing Be Whale Wise materials and messaging for them to share with those recreational boating audiences. So education is probably the primary. Coast Guard has not engaged in as much on the enforcement side because of their other priorities, you know, homeland security and search and rescue. But they definitely are a partner and really help with that education and outreach. And there was more to that question beyond the Coast Guard that I've already forgotten. So help remind me.
Yeah, do you have plans on using aerial vehicles to report multiple vessels at once breaking the law, and about harsh penalties depending on how seriously they break the law?
I'm not aware of any current plans for NOAA enforcement to use drones or UAVs or those types of methods for enforcement. As you can imagine, there's a lot of privacy issues around that kind of activity. I believe in Canada to do some of the monitoring of their interim sanctuary zones and other rules, they have used aircraft to help collect information and monitor compliance with some of their new rules. So I think there's a possibility there, but I'm not aware of NOAA going down that road currently. Although I will say they are a fabulous tool for research, where you can keep your distance from the whale, fly a drone high above a whale, probably doesn't even know it's there, and collect some really key photographs to teach us about the whales. There are some pretty strict penalties under the Marine Mammal Protection Act and Endangered Species Act. So our agents on the water are able to issue tickets and fines. And, you know, in different parts of the country, there have been some cases that have included things like forfeiture of vessels and even harsher penalties. So that's definitely part of the regulations.
Great, thank you. All right, well, the last one, unless anybody else has any other questions you want to write in there, but the last one is, hello, not a question, but just to say hello from the Sea of Cortez and Bahia de Los Angeles. There were some fishermen out yesterday who said that they saw an orca. Down here, I believe that is the transient orcas who come in here. So I guess my question for you is, do you know anything about the orcas off of Baja and what ecotypes those might be?
Most likely transients. I think we're still learning about the makeup of the transient populations. Are those whales seen in Mexico the same ones that we see in our waters, or all the way up to Alaska? I think that's probably still a question at hand. There's also been orcas in Hawaii that would be great to know more about. Those whales as well. You know, killer whales are amazing. They're in every single ocean on the planet. And even in our waters where we have residents and transients and offshores as well, northern residents, Alaska residents, it's just really amazing how these different ecotypes are using the habitat differently, interacting with each other differently, eating different things. It's really a marvel of evolution. And we have a poster that depicts the different ecotypes, including the multiple ecotypes in Antarctica, another fascinating thing to think about.
Great. Well, we did have a couple more come in, depending on how much longer you want to stay on, Lynn.
Sure.
Okay.
Cindy, can I, talking about the airline or aircraft observations and drones, could you just mention the use of recreational drones over whales, because we've seen an increase in that, and especially over orcas, or what, you know, how that is addressed.
Well, I will say the state regulations with the distances on the side and in front and back do apply to aircraft as well as vessels in the water. And the state has issued tickets to drone operators who've gotten too close. So that is one capability. We can work with our partners at Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife Enforcement. NOAA is still working on developing guidelines or distance recommendations. It's been very challenging, and as it's an emerging technology, I as it's been applied for research, that's been a great opportunity for us to learn more about how these drones or UAVs might impact the behavior of animals. Although I will say our drone operators are incredibly professional. They're using different equipment. They have a lot more practice than probably some of the hobbyists that are out there. And I think it has been really challenging to understand how to do it safely, if it can be done safely, especially if you're getting multiple drones. I know some of our researchers have found it challenging when there's other drones in the area. So again, I'd say be cautious, use your best judgment, keep your distance, and be aware of any changes you're seeing and pull back if you see any disturbance of any wildlife.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So there were a couple questions on how to get a whale warning flag, and we did post the website on there. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that? Is that the best thing for people to do if they're interested?
Yeah, I think the county has a way to sell them, and they're also in some stores in Seattle, and I can't remember whether it's West Marine maybe or Fishery Supply, but I think that information's on the San Juan County website as well.
Great.
And maybe if we have another boat show, come on by our Be Whale Wise booth in the future, and then you can get one there.
All right, next question. Are there limits for how long a vessel can stay with a whale and how to safely leave?
So we do have a guideline in the Be Whale Wise information. It's a recommendation to limit your viewing time to 30 minutes. And that's really thinking about the cumulative impacts of all the different vessels that are out there, commercial and recreational, who might be coming by to see the whales. So, first and foremost, follow the rules and guidelines. And I think the speed with the speed limit of less than 7 knots within a half mile is really helping us address boats that are coming on the scene or leaving the scene. So they're not just checking out the whales and then zooming off at a fast distance, or zooming over when you see a group of boats that might be whale watching. So that slow distance really helps reduce the sound. I also think it's very helpful in making sure that the boat operations are safe, that you're not distracted by an amazing wildlife viewing opportunity and forgetting that there's a lot of boats around. And so I think you really want to just be slow and be aware of what's around you.
Great. So the next question is, when recreational boaters renew their licenses each year, why not include a requirement for them to have read the whale-wise laws and regulations?
I think that's a great suggestion. And I think that's similar to one of the recommendations from the task force. So we'll definitely be sure to keep in touch with the state agencies and see what progress they're making on including that information in boater education and boater registration.
Great. Oh, and then there was a comment too that Fisheries Supply carries the flags.
Yes, Fishery Supply. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. I think we got through all the questions. Were there any others that we didn't get to?
Well, I have to admit, I accidentally dismissed one trying to move, trying to move a screen. So if we didn't get to some questions, that is
I think I might be able to check that. Hang on.
possibly why. There was a couple in the chat, but maybe they were addressed or duplicates. So
There was one asking for some elaboration or clarification of the rules on the no boating zone areas in the San Juan Islands. Did we get to that yet? I don't.
No, that's a good one.
Yeah, because that was a show, but yeah.
Yeah, so it's a 1/4 mile zone from Mitchell Bay to Eagle Point along the west side of San Juan Island. And so it's a 1/4 mile from shore is the no boat area. And then a 1/2 mile radius around Lime Kiln Whale Watch Park. It's voluntary. It's been part of the San Juan County Marine Stewardship Area for many years. And I believe they're actually reviewing that information right now. They had a workshop earlier this year to talk about some of their stewardship area and how to move forward with the protections that they're recommending at the county level.
Great. Oh, there was also a comment in the chat that for Canadians, the whale warning flags are available through Marine Education and Research Society. So there is a website posted in the chat if anybody is here from Canada and would like to get one of the flags there.
Excellent. Thanks, Jackie, if that
Yes.
was you.
That was Jackie. Thank you, Jackie. Okay, I found the dismissed, the one that accidentally got dismissed. So as you and Noah recognize the responsible role that the commercial whale watching community plays, can you comment on the important role their sentinel actions have on the protection of whales?
It's something that we're looking into. There's definitely been sound watch data collected that I think can help us better answer this question of whether the commercial whale watch boats on scene with whales are attracting other boats and serving as that, in a magnet role, or serving as a sentinel of an example of the proper distances and boater behavior around the whales. So I think it makes sense that they do set a good example, and there's been an effort to look at how the whale warning flags are affecting the number of incidents of boats not following the guidelines. So is that helping? Are there more boats around when there's whale warning flags flying? Or is there better boater behavior? So it's a good question, and one that we're definitely looking into.
Great, thank you, Lynn. All right. I think we will let you off the hook now because I think we got through all the questions. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn, and thank you for everybody who joined us tonight. We will be having another webinar in the next few weeks. We would like to have another one before the Southern residents come south into Puget Sound and come visit us. So please watch our website and Facebook page, and we'll post when our next webinar is. And we are very honored to have Lynn join us for our first one, and look forward to having all of you back again. Be safe out there.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lynn, so much. That was awesome.
Yeah, I think it was a good kickoff for the program.
Yeah, thank you. And great job, Cindy and Elisa and Amanda. We're getting this Zoom thing down.
Yeah, I appreciate all the tech support. Do you have a count of how many people were able to participate tonight?
I think we had 54 on there at one point, but I can go back and look and give you the total number because Zoom will tell me when we're done.
I saw 62 at one point, but I don't know.
I saw 62.
Yeah.
So that's
Great.
pretty good for a nighttime.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's
And we did record this, and we'll have it available on our YouTube channel as well in case you wanted to watch it again, or if there's somebody you know who didn't get a chance to watch it, we will have that link available for you.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot. And I'm sure I'll be in touch with you guys soon.
all right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us.